Hello and welcome to NBP Hot Seat with Ibrahim Ababou. We are pleased to welcome Mr. David Nicholls, who is the chairperson of South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, NECSA. Mr. Nicholls Mr. Nicholls have over 30 years of experience in the nuclear sector. He launched and headed up Eskom's Pebble Bed Modular Reactor (PBMR) projects from 1996 to 24. He was the technical leader of the program for nuclear new build from 27 onwards. He was appointed the general manager nuclear engineering in 2010 and Eskom's chief nuclear officer in 2016. This position included management of Koeberg and all other nuclear activities in Eskom. He was appointed chairperson of NECSA in 2020. South Africa has an ambitious nuclear program, including a new multipurpose nuclear research reactor to be procured by 2024, as well as the addition of 2,500 megawatts of nuclear energy. Welcome, David. It's a pleasure to host you today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks to you. My first question is, what is NECSA mandate and role in the South African nuclear industry?
Okay, NECSA is the State Nuclear Research Centre. So our mandate involves nuclear research. It involves running the nuclear research reactor and the spin-offs of doing that, related commercial activities, and I'll get back to that in a second. We also are tasked with uranium processing, which we don't currently do, but did in the past and may get back into doing at some point. Yeah, that's sort of it. And we're also clearly mandated with the decommissioning of a large range of nuclear facilities that were built in the 70s and the 80s as part of the previous programs of the country.
Interesting.
In terms of one of our major activities sort of externally is that of radioisotope production. We produce about 20% of the world's medical radioisotopes in the world. And we do that from our Safari 1 reactor, which is very much an old lady, but running well. Started in 1965, started up. And we have about 300 plus days a year operation, and we are currently commercially very involved in the radioisotope market internationally.
I will come to that right away. So, as you mentioned, NECSA is the operator of Safari 1 research reactor. And as you mentioned, there is great achievement done by Safari, which have been operational for a couple of years, if I'm not mistaken, 40 years. So can you... More than that. Can you share with us Safari 1 achievements?
Okay, well, Safari 1 was commissioned first in 1965. It was one of the early, it ran with clearly an HEU, high enriched uranium fuel, and has run very successfully since then. There was a very interesting phenomenon when we were sanctioned by the USA. We stopped getting highly enriched uranium from the USA. And we actually then converted to running on South African enriched uranium, and there was an enrichment facility at Pelindaba which enriched up to 90%, which fueled Safari and did other things. What was most notable was that we tracked them from one of the early stations to transfer Safari from HEU fuel to high assay low enrichment uranium, and it was 19.75% enriched uranium, and also could transfer the target plates, which we used to do the molybdenum-99 production, to low enriched uranium, which are, I think, the first people in the world to actually do that. So yeah, and it's been running well ever since. As you said, 40 years. I'm going to be God honest. It started in '65, and if my maths are correct, that makes it about 58 years old. Care and maintenance is very important. Life management program is very important, but clearly in a research reactor, there's far less pressure components to give us worries than there is in a commercial reactor. But yeah, that's basically it. And we are running We had a problem in 2016, 17. There was a problem with our regulator, essentially caused the hot cells to be closed down for a period. We've recovered from that, and we're now back fully in production. And that's going very well and is very successful for us.
That's great to hear. And as you mentioned, it's we would say old lady of almost 60 years. So time for retirement is getting closer.
Yes, it's one of those things with no obvious. There's no key component which says this point it dies. So we are looking. We have approval from cabinet to proceed with the replacement with what we call the multipurpose reactor. It's essentially a very similar reactor. We put out a request for information 2 years ago. We got very good responses from that, and we are now going through the process of finalizing our specification and looking to go to the market. And clearly, the funding of this is a significant issue in terms of how do we fund it, which remains always a challenge in these projects.
Clearly. And as I was saying, will be one of the oldest still operating research reactor globally. It's obvious that South Africa needs a replacement. Can you, as you mentioned about the multipurpose reactor, can you elaborate further on that? And what are the timelines for the research reactor, the new one, the new purpose research reactor?
Okay, we are in progress with our shareholder department, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, in discussions of going to tender on this process. Essentially, we are. I believe that we are. The key issue now is to resolve how such a thing is funded. We know that the Palace reactor in Belgium, they tried to go for public-private partnership. It didn't work, and they had to go back to essentially a state funding, a state guarantee option. We've done the economics on the multipurpose reactor, and I don't personally see it being giving a return on investment adequate for private investment without significant guarantees and promises. So my assumption is that while it can cover its costs and recover at a reasonable rate of return, low interest rates over an extended period, it could recover its costs through the running of the sales of radioisotopes. It's not going to be at a level that is going to really encourage an investor to put money in there, which will essentially be the same return as a government bond. So that discussion is ongoing. We're hoping to go out to tender as soon as we can. I would love to give you a date and a timeline, but I'm not in that situation. I'm not going to pretend that we have that certainty yet. We are in active discussions on what that entails going out. Clearly, it would be an open tender type approach.
I see.
I'd love to see the tender document going out in the next 12 months, but I'm not going to put any claims of certainty to that.
Yes, and my final question is a little bit away from research reactor, but toward the 2,500 megawatts. I understand that South Africa have already issued an RFI, and so when is I wouldn't say the timeline, but the date of making a decision on or responding to that RFI to the public, so to be published?
Okay, I think it's just worth. I'll just try and say where we are with that project and where it's going, and what the government's already said. I can't give timelines. It's from my own. The request for information went out and was well responded to, and it was in two portions really. One portion was what I call a classical pressurized water reactor, obviously being a Hualong 1 or an AP 1000 or a VVR 1200 type reactor. And the other one was a small modular reactor, which clearly was much less definitive because they are less definitive at the moment. And it's seen at the moment it's seen by many people as a two-part program. That is the 2 units of a large reactor, similar to our current Koeberg unit, probably based in either on the Koeberg site, which is near Cape Town, or about or near Port Elizabeth, or on a site called Thyspunt, which is about 100 kilometers from Thyspunt. Those two sites have been selected as potential sites going forward. And that process, and I'll just come back, that process is almost certainly going to be run through the same operators out of Koeberg. So currently, obviously, there's an ESCOM project because the expertise base for that kind of reactor sits with ESCOM. The other project's a small modular reactor, and NECSA's openly said that it would like to take the lead in that process. And we're looking for a sort of first of class of a small modular reactor built in conjunction with the OEM initially at our Pelendaba site, and then the view that it may be able to be rolled out onto our existing coal fleet sites to avoid transmission issues. And that would be conceivably a program of around 30,000 megawatts of power, because that's the old coal stations being closed down, net zero by 2050. So again, first comment is that we're currently looking at the common view is that we're looking at potentially large reactors on the coast, and then we're looking at small modular reactors to replace the current ESCOM coal fleet on those current sites. In terms of scheduling, there is processes. There were two parallel processes, really going maybe three. One parallel process is state planning, which is going through what's integrated resource plan. The 2,500 megawatts sits in the 2019 plan that was issued. There was another one due to get issued shortly for comment. We believe that still has substantial nuclear in it, in fact, somewhat larger nuclear, we understand, than the current one has in it. That's the one process. So that's what's driving the 2,500 megawatts. The other process coming from that essentially is what's called a Section 34 process, and that is approval by the energy regulator to allow someone to proceed and procure. That's been granted. There were some suspensive conditions in the original approval, which is unusual for the regulator. They haven't done that before. Renewables don't get suspensive conditions. I wonder why. But those suspensive conditions were apparently cleared by the regulator about 2 weeks ago at a meeting of their board. So the present view is that the aim is to go out for the request for proposals before the end of this financial year. That is before April next year. My personal view is it'll probably be two different RFPs, one for, I've got a classical 2-unit plant, very much an EPC contract, very much a no particular technology transfer except what you need to build it on site and maintain it, with the normal guarantees, and that would be a clear and open tender process. The other one we would believe would get issued would be that for a small modular reactor. We will be much more in line with the joint venture type approach of us, and I mean us being the South African state. I'm not quite sure exactly how that would work. I've got views with a view of a first unit with options for further units given the success of the first one. And that's the first unit. In that case, the first unit we see would be on the Pelendaba site, which is in the NECSA site, which has actually got grid integration historically to allow us to put up to 200 megawatts plus on that site and feed out. So that's sort of the situation we're looking at. Does that answer your question properly?
Yes, yes. Thank you. It's answered the question, and it's very comprehensive. So thank you. Thanks once again, David, for this great enlightenment. So basically, we can now understand better the nuclear sector in South Africa. So, and in my opinion, South Africa should have a leading role in the nuclear industry in Africa, as obviously it's the first and still only country with a operational power plant so far. So it should accompany other African countries and share its expertise and lesson learned. I hope to see more development in the coming months. As you mentioned, 2024 seems to be a crucial year for the South African nuclear industry. Thank you once again, David. It's been great chatting with you. So for our YouTube viewers, feel free to leave your comments on the box below. Stay tuned for our next episode of NBP Hot Seat. Thank you very much, David.
Yes, thank you.